Om Stapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupini avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Thank you, Naman, for that introduction. So we are going to conclude this discussion of this particular school of Buddhism, maybe within 2-3 sessions. And then we will take up an equally important philosophy of idealism belonging to the same Mahayana tradition. It's called Yogachara or Vijnanavada. So right now, before concluding Shunyavada,
hold on, everyone. I can't hear Swamiji, so
okay.
Let's fix this problem.
Can you hear me? They can't hear, Sashi.
There's somebody muted
Eh? Somebody muted?
Somebody muted everyone.
Somebody?
Yeah, now they can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you so much for drawing your attention to this. So I was trying to mention that we will conclude this discussion of Buddhism. I mean the discussion on the Shunyavada school of Buddhism, Nagarjuna school of Buddhism, within 3-4 sessions. And then after that we will take up an equally important school of Buddhist philosophical tradition. It's called the Yogachara or Vijnanavada, Asanga, Vasubandhu and others. But the reason why I prolonged this and made it more elaborate is that Shunyavada is perhaps the most well-known school of Buddhism right now. It is spreading in many parts of the world, and especially after the rediscovery of some of the texts which were lost, and they were rediscovered from Tibet. The Sanskrit original was lost. Most probably the existing copies in Nalanda University was burned by the invaders who attacked Nalanda University. Muhammad Bakhtiyar Khilji, he attacked and destroyed the university maybe around, I think, 12th century, 13th century AD. Now, before concluding our discussion on Madhyamika system or Madhyamika Karika, called Mula Madhyama Shastra or Mula Madhyama Karika, we have to discuss 2 more important books. That is Vigraha Vyavartini, which I briefly mentioned, and an equally important book that is Ratnavali. Now, when you go to Google, or maybe when you try to explore what is Ratnavali, you have to remember Ratnavali is also the name of a famous drama written by King Harshavardhana around 6th century AD. He was a great scholar, dramatist, playwright, and a great philosopher. Anyway, so that's a story. Now, before concluding this Madhyamika Karika, just a brief summary of the book as a whole. It is the most important, or maybe the most important foundational work of Shunyavada. And then it is well known. And then the next one is Vigraha Vyavartini. So, Mula Madhyama Shastra or Mula Madhyama Karika, it deals with the central principle of the middle path. Now, Vigraha Vyavartini, on the other hand, it is a kind of dialectical work, which is it tries to dispel all possible oppositions, objections, what we call Purva Paksha. Nagarjuna was trying to answer and demolish the accusations of Nayayikas, who were extreme realists in Indian philosophical system. And Nagarjuna system is a kind of extreme idealism. So, Nagarjuna tries to address objections to his views, especially on logic and epistemology. Now, here is something important. One of the running themes of Nagarjuna's argument from an epistemological point of view is, he says he doesn't have his own position to declare. Rather, he is only interested in revealing the inconsistencies or the untenables, the logical fallacies of the opponent's views. So, what he does is, he appears to accept the opponent's view. He doesn't project his own view. He has nothing to project. And then, after entering the fort of the opponent's philosophical system, he deconstructs, he reveals all the inconsistencies, all the contradictions, inherent contradictions, not external contradictions. If you accept that view, these are some serious problems. So, that system collapses naturally. Now, and then he says, all ideas, all views are equally wrong. Now, the opponents, so he posits an objection on behalf of his opponent, his adversary, philosophical adversary. In that case, your Shunyavada is also a delusion. Everything is then your Shunyavada. All the arguments you are putting forward can also be deemed as wrong or maybe self-contradictory. But Nagarjuna says, I don't have anything to prove. I don't have my own position. I have only to demolish the existing arguments which try to establish a positive entity, and I just want to show that such a positive entity cannot exist even according to your own views. Then what about your view? He says, I don't have anything to prove because there is nothing that exists. So my job is simple. So this is a kind of extreme dialectical work, Vigraha Vyavartini. And then, of course, he talks about Shunyada and other things. It's a very short book, only 70 verses. And another important book is, Ratnavali. Ratnavali literally means avali, garland, you call mala, Ratnamala sometimes called. Garland of Ratna, Ratna means diamond, precious jewels. So it is a garland of great ideas. And again, it is very different from Vigrahavyavartini or Mula Madhyama Shastra, because it is a kind of didactic instructional work. It is addressed to a king, an unnamed king, and it deals with the principles of statecraft, the ideals of a philosopher king. What should be the moral and ethical values that every ruler, every king should follow? That's what he's trying to do. So Mula Madhyama Shastra has got around 548 verses. Slight variations could be found in different editions between 548, 547 and 550. And Vigrahavyavartini is very short. The edition that I have, the Sanskrit version, has got 72 verses. But according to some authors, there are different versions with only 70 verses. And Ratnavali, which I mentioned, is a didactic work, instructional, which really is meant to educate and teach a king about the ethical and moral principles of statecraft. It has got it's somewhat bigger than the previous one. It's in the 500 verses it has got. And then apart from that, in addition to that, there are a few more works that Nagarjuna wrote. We are not going to discuss them. I am going to limit our discussion to three fundamental foundational works. One is Mula Madhyama Karika, the other one is Vigrahavyavartini, and then briefly Ratnavali. And there are a few more other books Chadushtava, then Sutra Samuchaya, a compendium of sutra. Sutra means small statements. Alpakshar masandigdam saravat vishrutomukham, like that. Astova manavadyam cha sutram sutra vido viduhu. A sutra is a technical name used in philosophical literature, both Vedanta and also Buddhism in this context. The sutra means alpakshar, a few words, and then, but it should contain, it should be loaded with a lot of meaning. It should be capable of being interpreted in so many different ways. There's so much scope for various interpretations within that sutra. Many of the earliest literature on Indian philosophical systems, like, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Uttaramimamsa, Purvamimamsa. Purvamimamsa is Jaimini system, ritualistic school. Uttaramimamsa is Vedanta. Many of the earliest foundational works of these philosophical systems were written in sutra form. Small, pithy statements. It can be very, very brief. It can be slightly long also. The most famous and well-known sutra work, it may be the entire Indian philosophical tradition, is Brahma Sutras, Vedanta Sutras. One sutra may be very small, Adhado Brahma Jignasa actually begins, and some sutras can be quite long. Maybe the shortest sutra exists in Panini's Vyakarana. Indian grammarian name is Panini, lived around the 6th or 7th century BC. He was born somewhere in today's West Punjab, which is part of Pakistan today. You can see the place where he was born. And he was the great grammarian who went all over India, and he studied different variations of speech and patterns of usage of Sanskrit, and he studied all that, and then he wrote a book called Ashtadhyayi, in which 8 chapters, which is a kind of standardization of modern Sanskrit. So modern Sanskrit is only 2,900 years old. That's the thing. We call it modern, but it becomes modernized in 9th century BC. And there's an interesting story which maybe in this somewhat boring session of highly dialectical philosophical discussions, a little story may be okay. Panini was about to get married. He was a young man. He was the brightest student of his teacher, grammar teacher. So he was about to enter the institution of marriage. Everything was ready. At the last moment, the ritual, he got a message from his guru, his teacher. He is the one who taught him Sanskrit grammar. So when the word came from his teacher, he dropped everything. Maybe modern feminists won't agree with Panini, I'm sure, but he is a great man who apparently, even according to Western philologists and scholars, is the greatest name in the entire range of the science of language, so to speak. Because Panini's Ashtadhyayi is considered to be one of the most marvelous creation of human mind and human intellect. You can read, of course, right from 18th century onwards, German grammarians and later on other European countries, the great scholars began to take great interest in the study of Sanskrit grammar, this Panini's Ashtadhyayi. Now, and then, he got this word, a messenger came to call him, and he said his guru is calling, your teacher is calling you, and he dropped everything and went there. And the guru told him, right now, this moment, you start your journey, traveling all over India. All over India of those days, it included today's Afghanistan, today's Pakistan, today's Bangladesh, Burma, everything, entire subcontinent. He traveled and he studied the patterns and usages of Sanskrit language. And then he wrote this well-known book, Ashtadhyayi. And the foundation of the Ashtadhyayi is, 14 sutras. Maheshwara Sutras. Maheshwarat Agatani Sutrani Maheshwara Sutrani. And the shortest sutra is A. That is the shortest sutra. You have got only 2 letters. Now, grammarians wrote huge books, Katyayana, Patanjali, and others, interpreting the meaning of this single sutra, A. One may think totally crazy, but you have to study that. There are many books available on this subject. This is about grammar, anyway. So, what you're talking about, sutra means a small epic statement which will be loaded with a lot of meaning and capable of being interpreted in so many different ways. And then another important work of Nagarjuna was Bodhicitta Vivarana. It's an exposition of a mind as it awakens to Bodhi, to enlightenment, the awakening mind. Then there is another one, Suhur Lekha, which is a letter to a good friend. Praditya Samutpada Hridayakarika, very long title. It is maybe some verses written on the heart of dependent origination, Praditya Samutpada. So this is just a general introduction to this great man, Nagarjuna. So remember, when you read Ratnavali, which I'm going to do, I believe, today if we get enough time, otherwise maybe next session, you see Nagarjuna, a great humanist, great philosopher. This absolutely ruthless dialectician, he was almost like a demolition squad, a single-man demolition squad. If you go to Vigraha Vyavartini, if you read the commentary, Prasannapada by Chandrakirti, there's a commentary on Mula Madhyama Karika, you find Nagarjuna is such a ruthless, uncompromising, cold-blooded logic. The human intellect, its sharpness, how it functions, is a great miracle. It's a wonderful thing to see when you study that. So we are going to take up some portions of that. So, so I mentioned, please remember what we are going to discuss first, Mula Madhyama Karika, which I already discussed earlier, fundamental verses, around 450, 448 verses, Vigraha Vyavartini, which is a dialectical defense of Nagarjuna's views. And then Ratnavali, which is the Vigraha Vyavartini is dialectical, but Ratnavali is didactic. There's a great difference. Vigraha Vyavartini is an extremely dialectical, cold-blooded logic. He deconstructs, he demolishes all existing views. In a way, it is a justification, a defense of some of his own views. And he himself wrote a commentary on his own work. Vigraha Vyavartini has got a commentary written by Nagarjuna himself. So he is clarifying his position. He says that he doesn't want to assert any positive metaphysical position, but he only exposes the contradictions in all the views that exist in different philosophical traditions. So it is a dialectical work using dialectical skills. The third book is Ratnavali. It is didactic, which means giving instructions, like a teacher teaching morality, principles of morality, ethics and values. So how you should practice compassion, how you should practice generosity and wisdom, all based on your realization of emptiness. That's very interesting. So Nagarjuna says, if you realize, if you get enlightenment, and if you realize the emptiness as a supreme truth, if you realize that there is nothing inherently real or absolutely real, spontaneously real in this world, that will give you a special kind of wisdom. Then why should you be cruel to other people? Everything, the money that we are working hard to acquire, maybe through false means, that money is not going to stay there for long. So we won't be greedy any longer. So a king can be compassionate. He can practice, he can be an ideal philosopher king. He can be generous and he'll be wise when and also he will practice non-violence. He will avoid harsh punishments. And he talks about the need for education, taking care of the vulnerable, and abolishing capital punishments. Nagarjuna talks. That is the ideal of an ideal king. Why? Because you know very well that there is nothing in this world that is going to exist for all times. The reputation for which you are trying to conquer the neighboring kingdom, or the greed for wealth and different possessions for which you are raising a big army, those things won't last long. So realization of what we wrongly interpret as emptiness, but shunyata. So what is shunyata? Shunyata is a kind of transcendental experience where you instinctively feel compassion, generosity and wisdom, and what you may call a kind of spiritual common sense when you realize that there is nothing in this world which is going to last for all times. So why? It doesn't mean that you should be inactive, but we won't practice hostility, violence or cruelty when we realize that there is nothing in this world which is permanent, which is inherently real. Everything is conditioned. Everything is dependent. So dependent origination, Bodhicitta Samutpada, which is part of one of his well-known books which I mentioned just now. So these are the symbols. Now let us see some of the most well-known verses in the Mula Madhyama Karika, and then we will also try to discuss some of the chosen verses from Vigraha Vyavartini, the dispeller of, maybe the one which dispels all doubts and confusions, and also Ratnavali. We'll take up some verses and we'll try to find out how they are all somehow related to the foundational book, that is Mula Madhyama Karika. So you have to remember, though Nagarjuna must have written, there are some books which we know very well that actually can be attributed to him. There are some books which scholars still have different views with regard to whether they actually were written by Nagarjuna or not. But these three books are undisputably Nagarjuna's own works and the most authentic works, of which Mula Madhyama Shastra is the most important one. And Vigraha Vyavartini is an attempt to dialectically defend his positions, which he expressed in Mula Madhyama Karika. I remember it was Chandrakirti who brought out many of these ideas. Chandrakirti is the most prominent thinker in the Prasangika school of Shunyavada. Chandrakirti is his well-known book is Prasannapada. So Prasangika means the method of revealing the inherent contradictions in another system of philosophy and thereby proving that they are all wrong, but you don't have to prove anything of your own, because your position is that there is nothing in this world that actually inherently is permanent. So nothing to prove. So in this process, he brings this way of methodology, which in English it may be called the reductio ad absurdum, as it is often known. So one well-known verse in Mula Madhyama Shastra: Na nirodho, na utpattir, na bhudo, na cha bhuvaha, na bandho, na cha mokshosti, tattvamesha paramarthada. It's almost the same idea was later repeated and written by Gaudapada in Gaudapada Karika. Na nirodho na chotpatti na bandho na cha sadhaka na mumukshu na ve muktaha ittesha paramartha. So Nagarjuna says, looking at this world, he says, everything is dependent upon something else. Conditioned origination or dependent origination. So nothing is inherently real. Conditioned. So it's called dependent origination. So in that respect, even the cessation of samsara, that also doesn't exist because samsara itself doesn't exist. There is no cessation because there is no origination. Na bhudo na cha bhuvaha. There is neither past, neither future, nor present. Na bandho na cha mokshosti. Na bandho na cha sadhaka. That is how Gaudapada puts it in Gaudapada Karika. Gaudapada wrote approximately about 300 years after Nagarjuna. Tattvamesha paramartha, ittesha paramartha. That is, Gaudapada repeats the same thing. So it's very obvious that when you approach from one angle, it is Shunya. When you approach from the other angle, it is Brahman. Both are non-dual. Both are transcendental. Both transcends the empirical. Shankaracharya calls it Vyavaharika Satta. Nagarjuna calls it Samvruddhi Satta. This empirical common sense experiences. But when you transcend them, you approach Paramarthata. And that is Shunya experience. And Shankara calls it Brahman. So the same thing. Now when I make this statement, I'm sure that if we go to a traditional Buddhist who reads this book and teaches this book without any reference to other systems of philosophy, that this may not be, it may not make sense to a Buddhist, a traditional Buddhist student. And this may not make sense for an Advaiti either. Now, this is what I said. When you take our mind beyond the labels, beyond the external brands of philosophical dogmas, and we talk about how it is felt and experienced by a spiritual seeker, then you find Nagarjuna and Shankara or Gaudapada absolutely no difference from a different perspective. Because all the qualities that you mentioned, that are mentioned in Jivanmukti Viveka, which actually discusses the characteristics of an enlightened person, Advaiti, or Panchadasi, Vidyaranya's Panchadasi, very famous. Maybe it's the most advanced kind of introductory work for Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. So you can find a number of characteristics mentioned in these books of an Advaitin, of a spiritual seeker, Advaitin, who have reached the experience level of Advaita. You find the same thing that Nagarjuna mentions, or Buddha, for the matter, Buddha mentions in Dhammapada. And again, Mulamadhyama Shastra says, Ye praditya samutpadam pashyadi sapashyati dukkham sammik samutpannam sammik viruddhamevacha. Yasya praditya samutpada shunyada nyayade sada tasya nasti hi samshayo dharmanam tattvadarshinaha. So, anyone who sees this world, empirical experience, empirical world, as praditya samutpada, which means you don't see any of these entities as inherently existing only as part of the dependent origination cycle. When you realize this, what happens is, you realize the supreme truth. And such a person who understands this dependent origination, yasya praditi samutpada shunyada jnayate sada. He always, every moment, is looking at this world. He sees these mountains and oceans and rivers and skies, the stock exchange, our own job, bank balance, all we see. All these are part of the impermanent, dependent origination phenomenon. That is Jagat or Vyavaharika Satta according to Advaitins, Loka Samvruddhi according to Nagarjuna. That's why, in terms of sheer philosophical, dialectical skill, there is no one in Buddhist tradition who can come anywhere near Nagarjuna, not even close to him. Vasubandhu, Vasubandhu and Asanga, these two great names in the Yogacara system, Asanga and Vasubandhu, Dignaga. Dignaga was a great dialectician. He is closely related to the development of Madhyama Nyaya, means after Gautama, there is a school of higher development in Nyaya system. Dignaga was its a great exponent. So they were also great dialecticians. But in Nagarjuna's system, you can say that he says everything about Shunya that Shankaracharya later says about Brahman. Tasya praditya samutpada shunyada jnayate sada. So when you look at this world, then you find that everything in this world comes from something, exists, then that itself becomes a cause of something else. And this chain continues. The cosmos, the universe, and also human life goes through these cycles of origination, dependent origination, existing, and then disappearing, again reappearing. So it doesn't have an existence of its own. That is why such a person, he always understands this dependent origination, this Jagat, the universe, as emptiness. Emptiness again is not my word. Nagarjuna didn't use emptiness, he uses Shunyata. But translation, as I mentioned, is always a big problem in higher philosophy. So once we can explain the actual meaning when it comes from the original master, then we will be doing more justice to him. Poor Nagarjuna would collapse, would not have dreamt that one day, maybe 19, maybe 18 centuries later, somebody will translate his Shunya as nothingness, the great nothingness, the great emptiness. You never have, I don't think you have ever dreamt of this. It is not nothingness. It is nothing but vyavaharika, relative. So again, he continues this. Ya praditi samutpanna shunyada tam prachakshmabhi sa prapanchopashama shanta sa nisubhava uchyate. So that which is part of this dependent origination cycle, we call it Shunyata. Ya praditya samutpanna. It has originated, but depending upon something else, dependently originated, so to speak. And that we call emptiness. Sa Shunyata tam vayam prachakshmaki. Vayam, this is my own edition. So we call it Shunyata. That is dependent origination. Sa prapanchopashama shanta. So, sadhisubhava uchyate. Swadharma anatmana sarvadharma niratmika nahi atma nacha dharma asti tasman na atma na dharmakaka. So here is a problem. And this is a very big problem. How to understand the foundational doctrine of Buddhism called anatta in Pali or anatma, non-atman. So you can get a clue here. Sarvadharma anatmanaha, sarvadharma niratmikaha, nahi atma nasa dharma asti tasmana atmana dharmakaha. The entire phenomena, what do you mean by phenomena? The phenomenon world, what we experience with our mind and our five senses of perception. That is phenomenal world. And this phenomenal world and all the entities in the phenomenal world are without an Atman. Here what it means is without any permanent, without any permanence, that's the meaning. So Atma, by the word Atma, in pre-Advaitic times, the Atma was used in the sense as something always existing. This is true in Shankaracharya's commentaries also. In Shankara Bhashyas, there are places where the word Atma is used to mean mind. There are places where the Atma is used to mean individual self, Jivatma. And there are places where Atma means Paramatma, the Supreme Brahman Self. So, you have to remember, when you find that philosophy has evolved so much, but language has not evolved as much. Then what happens is, the same word can mean different things in different context and also according to the person who uses it. This is a fundamental principle in Vaidika Vyakarana system. Sarvesham Shabdanam Dhadujatvam Dhatunam Anegarthatvam cha. This is a statement from Durgacharya's commentary on this what do you call which are Niruktam. Niruktam is the Vaidika Nikhandu. Vaidika Nikhandu later became Niruktam. Vaidika Nikhandu as such is not easily available now, but Niruktam is available. Niruktam is the oldest existing commentary on Vaidika Shabdas, means Vedic sounds, Vedic usages. Yaska is the author. 6th century BC, after Panini. The word is Niruktam. Niruktam itself means etymology, a meaning or set of meanings that you derive using the track of etymology. So Niruktam takes up many Vedic mantras from different suktas. Not entire Veda, it's very huge. A small fraction of Vedic mantras. And then Yaska writes possible meanings, possible interpretations, definitions of Vaidika Shabdas, Vedic sound. For example, Deva Shabda. Deva in Shabda means God. Devo Danadva, Deepanadva, Dusthanova, Bhavatiti. What is Deva Shabda? Deva or God and goddesses, whatever may be, feminine archetype or masculine archetype, is an entity that lives high in the sky, Dusthanova. Danadva, when you pray to those deities, they listen to your prayers. Deepanadva, they kindle the light of knowledge in your heart. Such an entity is called Deva. I mean, you may equate them with the biblical angels. The angels living in heaven, like Devas also live in Swarga, heaven. That's so hit by Vishwanara Kasmat. Who is Vishwanara? So like that, Vishwanarayati Vishvaishwanara. He takes up one word from Vedic literature and then he gives a number of etymological interpretations. As he must have preserved from his much earlier work called Vaidika Nikhandu. Now, Durgacharya was a commentator on this Niruktam. And he says, every word comes from a root, Sarvesham Shabdanam Dhadujatam. Every Shabda is born of a Dhadu root. Dhanu Nam Anegarthattu means, and every root can have any number of meanings. And then he says, it depends upon the context in which a word is used or the person who uses that word. So meaning of a word could be different, can differ depending upon the context where it is used and depending upon the person who uses that word. Contextual interpretation. So in Vedantic literature and especially in Shankara Bhashyas you find the word Atma or Atman. Atma, Atmano, Atmana means Atma Shabda. Atma can have many different kinds of meaning. In some context it means even body, mind, intellect, individual soul, individual self, or the Paramatman. It all can mean. So now what is Nagarjuna's statement? Sarvadharma anatmanaka. Here Sarvadharma means all these entities constituting this phenomenal world, they are without permanence, without any essence. That's the meaning of anatma. There is then he says, Nahi Atma, Nahi Dharma asti. There is neither Atma, there is neither inherent existence nor phenomenal world. In the sense, either this phenomenal world or things that exist in this phenomenal world, they do not have any inherent permanent existence. Tasmat na Atma na Dharmakaka. Therefore, there is neither Atma, self, nor what belongs to self. So, Atma here means something that gives it permanent ontological reality. Phenomenal world doesn't have permanent ontological reality. That's what Nagarjuna says. Sunyatayam na janmasti, sunyatayam cha na nidhanam, sunyatayam na bandhosti, sunyatayam na mokshanam. So he says, in Shunyada, again I would prefer to use the word Shunyada as an act of compassion for Nagarjuna. Instead of emptiness, we can use the word Shunyada. So in Shunyada, there is no birth and then there is no death. And now here he uses an interesting method. He says he doesn't have any position of his own. It's called pratigna in traditional arguments. It's called pratigna. What you posit, what you propose to establish is called pratigna. Pratigna hinam etat chet doshopi na vidyate. Somebody raised an objection, as I mentioned earlier, Ayayikas mostly, whom he is trying to refute in Mulamantimakarika. If you are going to establish that there is nothing in this world which exists, kind of ultra nihilism, then your Shunyavada also, your doctrine of Shunyada also is false, non-existent. He says, that may be true if I have something to prove. If I have my own position, if I were to assert my position, you can say what you are trying to assert also is shunya, is unreal. So he says, but you don't have anything. Therefore, that problem doesn't affect me. That defect cannot be attributed to me. That's what he says. He's defending his position. This is actually the essence of the Buddhist understanding of reductio ad absurdum. So Socrates or Plato, maybe early philosophers in Western world, they argued, asked questions, and then extracted answers, and then demolished those answers. But Nagarjuna, going beyond that, he says, and he develops this into an established method of argument. So he wrote a book, that is this Vigraha Vyavartini, in which he says he's countering the opposite views, the accusations. He's defending himself against the accusations from other schools, saying that you can blame me and say that my own doctrine is all part of this shunya. There's no entity, no existence. If I am trying to prove something as my doctrine, but I don't have anything else. That's why he says, he calls himself Pradigna Hina. I am somebody without any position of his own. So there is no problem if I you cannot tell me that what I am saying also is zero. So this is so you can find in this Vigraha Vyavartini very interesting, very philosophical, dialectical method is employing. Now we will say a few things about Ratnavali. It's a well-known book. Nagarjuna was a great humanist, a great ethical philosopher. Maybe the English translation frequently given is it's a garland of precious, invaluable teachings, you may call it. Or maybe garland of diamonds, rubies. Because Ratna could mean anything that is of a sublime, precious nature. As I mentioned, he's entirely didactic in his character. He's addressed to a king. So practical advice for ethical governance. The profound implication of the Mahayana, this Madhyamika Buddhist philosophy. So it's 5 chapters, and it also deals with the responsibilities of administrators, principles of ethical, moral principles of stagecraft, and also personal, spiritual development of individual aspirants. So one is personal ethics and happiness. It deals with the early parts, for example, talks about higher virtues, ethical conduct, mental discipline to ensure happiness in this and future lives. Future life means when you reach a point, when it's a point of nirvana, then you experience something which is beyond explanation. That's the time when you experience the actual reality of emptiness of the phenomenal world. But before that, when you start practicing the eightfold disciplines, for example, samyak drishti, samyak vyayama, samyak ajiva, samyak vak, like that, eightfold disciplines we already discussed very elaborately in the earlier sessions. So when you do that, you feel happiness, and also your future life also will be blessed if you practice these ethical values. So you can find that Buddha himself, Bodhicitta, he himself was climbing the ladder of evolution through innumerable life cycles, the rebirth stories, Jataka tales, 543 of them. And eventually, at the end, he was born as Gautama Buddha. But before that, he was practicing all these great values. So when you do that, you feel happiness and you are also gifted with a higher life. Next life will be much more blessed than this life. So like that, anyway, so we will conclude today and we will discuss this well-known Ratnavali. It's a poetical work, which is a book on morality, ethics, stagecraft, and instruction and teaching for rulers. We'll discuss that later. Now you can have interaction. Most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Maharaj, I'll start by asking you
Yeah,
about
please. Yeah.
about the clarification of the term Bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, which you described as in English as awakening or enlightenment.
Yeah.
And you said that these words are to be understood in context and in light of the evolution of the philosophy. So as I was thinking about the word, I was wondering whether it's intended to be understood as part of idealistic philosophy or as Buddhistic practice, or exactly how is it meant, or is it meant in all of those ways and more, depending on context in which it's offered?
Yeah. How a spiritual seeker in Buddhist tradition, how he gradually evolves and reaches a stage where he realizes Shunyavada, which is the awakening of Bodhicitta. Bodha means awakening, Chitta means mind. So when we realize the Praditya Samutpada, the dependent origination character of the phenomenal world, then we realize that none of these things have any inherent permanent essence or existence. At that time, we experience a kind of inner enlightenment. And how this happens, that is the subject of discussion.
Maharaj, is it the same as in Hindu philosophy, as in Hindu psychology?
Yeah.
From the Advaita perspective? Same thing?
Yeah. You can find this in a way in yoga tradition. There is called Niruddha Vritti. Niruddha means you get out of this prison of vrittis and vasana samskaras. Tendencies and impressions that already accumulate in the mental system, they get completely niruddhami, completely, they cease to exist. There is no more there. That's why mind has got, according to yoga, incidentally, it's very interesting because many of the Buddhists were practitioners of yoga. And according to some sources, Vijnana Bhikshu, one of the commentators of Yoga Sutras, was himself a Buddhist. So, in fact, Yogachara Buddhists were called Yogachara because they were practicing yoga. So anyway, that's the other school of idealism in Mahayana tradition. So coming to the subject, according to yoga, we have 5 levels of evolution depending upon the status of vrittis in the mental system. That is Mudham, Vikshiptam, Vikshiptam is the 3rd stage. Klishtam, Mudham, Vikshiptam, Ekagram, Niruddham. So when we are in a state of, a kind of abnormal state of total confusion and ignorance, Mudha state, totally confused. Kshiptam, same. Mind is, these 2 states, Kshiptam and Mudham, belong somewhat to the abnormal or below normal state. There are not many people. Most of the people belong to 3rd order, that is Vikshiptam, where mind can concentrate on something for some time, but not for too long, again mind moves into something else. Like the pendulum of a clock. It doesn't stay there. We go to a temple, we go to a church, a synagogue, we attend a spiritual prayer meeting. We feel a kind of inner joy. When we return home, we are disturbed. Mind again is disturbed. Again, when we go back, again we feel this experience. So, we call it vikshiptam. In fact, most of the normal people belong to this third category. Kshiptam and mudam are abnormal, somewhat abnormal, but vikshiptam is a normal condition of the human mind. We are able to connect when something sublime, something good happens. We feel happy about it. But after some time, it's gone. Again, we have to get it back. Now, when we practice for a long time with concentration, the duration of this blessed feeling, it grows longer and longer. Eventually, it becomes ekagram. Vikshipta state, this wavering state, slowly gets reduced and steadiness increases more and more. Beyond this, the fifth stage is niruddha vritti, where all vrittis or niruddha are completely transcended. All vrittis are transcended. That state of enlightenment. And this happens between dhyana and samadhi level. So, what we call bodhicitta can be compared to the state of niruddha vritti from a psychological perspective, from a vritti samskara perspective. Okay. From a spiritual evolution perspective, we call it bodhicitta. From the standpoint of what happens to the mind and the sensations, you may call it niruddha state. You're completely transcended because all the negative vrittis and vasanas, samskaras are completely transcended. Not just blocked. If they're blocked, they'll come back again. We are totally free from them because we're totally transcended. One may see such a person, even if he finds himself in a situation which is very similar to what he had gone through in his early stage of life, he's safe. He won't be tempted to slip back to his previous situation. Because transcended means total liberation. That's what happens. That is Bodhicitta.
Maharaj, very quickly, in the didactic work Ratnavali,
Yeah.
are these elements also addressed and offered as instructions to the king in that work?
Yeah, so, the importance of Shunyavada experience is mentioned as a path to liberation. From ordinary happiness to ultimate goal of liberation is mentioned here. That is Buddhahood. So, and also to practice this, you should practice compassion and you should realize the truth of Shunyata. And that will give you the essence of wisdom. Then you can find a lot of social, political advice, social justice, critique of attachment, ignorance, qualities of Buddhahood. All these are mentioned here. It's kind of, a kind of integrating practical advice with the profound metaphysics of Shunya. So when you realize Shunya, what really happens is, whatever was binding us to this world, which created anger, depression, greed, all those are completely gone. Because what made us greedy? Greed for wealth. The wealth itself comes today, tomorrow goes away. It's empty, it's Shunya. Position, power, okay. It will also come and will go. So when you realize this, that is wisdom, but that is also Bodhicitta. And then that's the experience of Shunyata. And this is exactly what happens to a Brahmajnani according to Jivan Mukti Viveka, the well-known book, and also Panchadashi. Jivan Mukti Viveka is a more focused book on the spiritual evolution of an Advaiti, the same experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank
Very
you.
clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Swami.
Yeah.
I'm wondering. I've heard that that the Buddhist path. So how do I say that in order to realize become a Jivan Mukta, one needs to be working towards something positive, like Ramana Maharshi said, the I am, or who am I?
Yeah.
I've heard that Buddhism actually cannot work because one cannot work towards nothingness. That one needs a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Could you explain? I mean, is Buddhism actually valid, or any Buddhists who've made it to Nirvana actually have been practicing Advaita, not Buddhism?
Yeah. No, really, as you mentioned, Nirvana is the goal of a Buddhist. That's why he's practicing the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Disciplines. You are practicing righteousness in your word, deed, action, your memory, your perception, your effort, even your concentration, samadhi, the last eighth one. You are doing all these. What's the goal? To attain nirvana. Now, what is that nirvana? That nirvana is the realization that everything in this empirical world is shunya, devoid of any essence. Now, but that experience should be a positive entity. Even the realization that everything is shunya cannot be empty. Again, we cannot really get out of the deep-rooted tendency to see shunya as nothingness, as emptiness. That's the main problem. The language barrier cannot be transcended, very difficult. But so what happens frequently, people, scholars do not link these words to any kind of real human experience. See, Buddha's face shone, Lalita Vistara says, when there was a shining face Buddha had, when he realized enlightenment, he got enlightenment. And he got up and went straight to Benares, Sarnath, and he preached Buddhism, the great teachings. Now, if you realize what you call in English emptiness, your face will be dark. There will be no light on your eyes or in your words. But Buddha's words were not empty. So they called Buddha's teaching was emptiness, but Buddha himself was, his words were not empty of any essence. So, to understand the true meaning of Shunyada, you have to go to Nagarjuna directly, not English translations. Translations have done havoc to poor Nagarjuna. Nirvana should be a positive experience, because Nirvana liberates you out of this prison of birth, life, death and rebirth. All 12 links which constitute Praditya Samutpada, dependent origination cycle. So something should be there that took you out of this prison. So what was it? This trap, what was it? And when you got out of it, immediately you realize Praditya Samutpada. So that cannot be what in English we call emptiness or nothingness. You can always analyze people, especially in certain kinds of insanity, where people become totally depressed. mind will be focusing on something totally terrifying. The whole facial expression will be very dark, very depressed look you can find. I don't think Buddha looked like that. Or even Nagarjuna for the matter. So, that's a very important point. Now, when I say this, I know that many traditional Buddhists will try to may assume that I am trying to impose Advaita on Buddha or Buddhism. No, I am trying to connect the Buddhist doctrine to some kind of inner human experience. Because that's what really counts. So you often find if there's a calmness and quietude on the face of a Buddhist seeker, then there should be something that gives him calmness and tranquility. You pray to a God and then you look such a horrendous, horrible looking person because you're praying to God all the time. So people won't dare to speak to him. When you hear their names in newspapers, you're terrified something terrible is going to happen because that man is praying to God. So the man who is praying to God should be a horrendous person. The whole world should be afraid of him. So what kind of God that can be? But when you look at Buddha, you don't find he was praying to a terrible, horrendous, violent God. Buddha was experiencing every day the Shunyavada. Again, better don't use the word emptiness. Shunyavada of the reality. That's the point.
Can Buddhism be a valid path as it's understood today then? Or is it I mean, if most people think of it incorrectly, can it help people spiritually reach enlightenment? Or it's
I am not in a position to judge and to evaluate different practices going on. There are very great men and great women, monks and laity. There are many wonderful people in different countries, different traditions. And also some of the practices of meditation all may be doing a lot of good. I'm sure there is no doubt about it. That's why people feel quietude, tranquility. But I don't think they are going to be Gautama Buddha anytime in this life. But even studying, reading, sitting quiet, and you concentrating on the fact that all these things come and go, they don't have any real eternal essence. It doesn't make you depressed. Rather, the experience of the absence of any essence in this empirical phenomena will automatically prompt you to think of something which may be, after all, the essence of it. The absence of any permanent entity of the empirical world, when you realize, you also will think of that supreme reality. In other words, the experience of the absence of essence of empirical world itself is a real experience. That is Shunyavada. Very clearly, this Praditya Samutpada is Shunyavada. Nagarjuna says in Vigraha Vyavartini.
So Swami, what it comes down to then maybe is that one cannot actually think of emptiness. So therefore that the mind can't think of nothing.
That is true.
That is capable.
Yeah, that is true. Actually, mind cannot focus on anything that is nothing. This is important thing. Secondly, you won't be able to really experience the impermanence of all these phenomenal things without relating it to something that is not impermanent. That permanent thing, see, Loka Sambuddhi Satyam and Paramartha Satyam. So after transcending Loka Sambuddhi, you experience Paramartha, Shunyavada. Nagarjuna says, which I already discussed this many times at that time. So there is a transcending of of this phenomenal world. And the transcending itself is Shunyada. When you realize Praditya Samutpada, then you are transcendent. When you realize everything is dependent, conditioned, and for that very reason devoid of any existence of its own, then you are realizing Shunyada. Again, so the problem of translating Shunyada into the word emptiness is a very serious problem, very difficult to get out of it. Because we are trying to enter Nagarjuna's world of ideas, not following his path, but a path of a different language barrier, That's a problem. Nothing.
Oh, well, I just wanted to follow up on Vijnana
Yeah, please.
Bhikshu because, especially in a discussion of this type, his commentaries on yoga and also his ties to Buddhism just seem to be a huge bridge between those worlds, which is what you made mention of the fact that you shouldn't be misunderstood as imposing Advaita on
No, I will never do
Buddhism.
that.
But Vijnana Bhikshu actually expresses these connections so beautifully later on, in his works.
Yeah.
Made mention of that, so it just seems like that bridge already.
Yeah, true. So that's why a kind of inner introvert instinct that you develop when you experience something transcendental. From that perspective, you can, when you look at it, you can see it may be the same spiritual experience called by two different names, that's all. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Thank you.